Okay.
Oh, we got a notification. Cool.
Yeah, we are live. How's everyone doing out there? If you guys can hear me, let me know. If you guys can see me, if you can see Peter, if you can see Alexander, also let me know in the chat. We are live. Guys, we are locked and loaded.
I wanted to say that.
We are locked and loaded, guys. Yeah. So that's what we are going to be discussing is...
Oh, we got a note.
I hear some. Okay.
No, that's me. I fixed it. My fault.
Right,
my fault.
Cool. Okay. So if you guys can see me, if you guys can hear me, let me know. Good audio. Says Queen Street Systems. Thank you for letting us know. Let's begin. Where's everyone joining us from? Let us know in the chat. And today we'll be focusing on Iran, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and the United States. And I'll kick it off with Trump's chat. But first, let's do the introductions. Well, let's see where people are joining us from real quick. Aloha, I imagine Hawaii, Northridge, California, Minnesota, Nigel from London, Kent, England, Bulgaria, Ireland, Australia, Malaysia, Napa Valley, cool, Dubai.
Must be the only conservative in Napa Valley.
Happy Jack, Arizona, yeah.
Wonderful wine growing area.
UK, Wales, Minnesota, Sydney, Australia, Scotland, UK, Australia, UK, Texas, Wisconsin, from Canada. Hey, Space Cat, how you doing? New Zealand, Naples, Florida. Okay, let's get moving from Mexico. How you guys doing today, Monday? And well, let's start it off with the introductions, then we'll do the tweet. We have in Moscow the host of RT's Crosstalk, the one and only Mr. Peter Lavelle. Peter, how are you doing today?
Very well. I remember, I think it was 36 hours ago, we were discussing if we should do this because there wasn't enough news flow. And then wham, boom, we got plenty to talk about. I'm doing great. The weather turned. It's time for sweaters.
Yeah, we were sending a message to say, when are we going to do a live, guys? And I was like, I sent a message and I go, I don't know, there's just not, we have the Democrat debates and we have, we're like, what are we going to cover? And then all of a sudden, what do you know? We have this story. And we have in London, Alexander Mercurs, the Oracle of London. Alexander, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, which is more than can be said for the political system in Britain, which is rapidly unraveling. And of course, we have a big Supreme Court decision tomorrow on Brexit. So it's actually a relief to be talking about other things. Because as you can imagine, the news here isn't exactly, how shall I say, scintillating.
I think that maybe a lot of people in the UK can go to the Human Rights Commission and say that there's, the Brexit is now turning into a human rights violation of the psyche of an entire nation. But that's a topic for another chat.
That's another chat in and of itself. So let's kick it off with the tweet that Trump sent, which is, God, it's pretty astounding tweet. Let me read it off and just guys, Alexander, Peter, just jump in. So here's Trump's tweet. Saudi Arabia oil supply was attacked. There is reason to believe that we know the culprit, are locked and loaded, depending on verification, but are waiting to hear from the kingdom as to who they believe was the cause of this attack and under what terms we would proceed. So we are waiting to hear from the kingdom. Guys, the floor is yours on that tweet, which blew my mind.
It's extraordinary that Donald Trump, through his tweet, is implying, even explicitly, that Saudi Arabia will decide how the United States will proceed. That is an extraordinary statement. However, it may be Trump's get out of jail card strategy, where he'll say, well, the Saudis decided how we would proceed. The Saudis are, their nervousness, there's no magnitude for how worried they are right now. Let's look at, first of all, the attack on the energy infrastructure is far more extensive than the mainstream media has been reporting, much more so. The type of technology that was used, where did it come from, who was operating it? There's even some suggestion that it was the attack came within the kingdom itself, and there is a realization that the royal family lives in a glass house, and it's very easy to throw rocks at it. And of course, it's going to be hotly debated. It always is, to what level Iran is involved in this here, which I think that we here, being responsible, are not going to say one way or another because we don't know. However, I would add a caveat to that. With the hundreds of billions of dollars that the United States and its allies spend on surveillance, you'd think they'd have kind of an idea of the trajectory and pictures and everything else. Just when you need that type of information to make a critical decision, it's always absent. It was absent in Syria. It was absent in the Donbass. And again, we have the good folks over at Moon of Alabama that it has been able to get some kind of imagery, but that's not being shown except for the plumes of fire and stuff like that. That's all that's shown on mainstream, and very little detail is given. More and more details should inform us that this was a well-calculated, well-planned, planned for a very long time, talking at least months, and it was executed brilliantly. And it is a message the Houthis took responsibility for it, and they're saying to the Saudis, you are extremely vulnerable, irrespective of who perpetrated this.
Alexander, the oil fields of Abqaiq facilities and the Quraysh field, 200 miles northeast of Riyadh, the Saudi capital.
Yes, well, can I, before we touch on that, just pass a moment Trump's tweet, because it really deserves breakdown. So he starts to say there is reason to believe that we know who perpetrated this. That is an admission that we actually don't know. And then he goes on to talk about verification. So they got a guess, and then he throws it back to the Saudis by saying that we're waiting for the Saudis to actually confirm to us and tell us what we want to do, even though we're locked and loaded. So it's actually a mass of contradictions. It suggests that actually the United States doesn't, in fact, know who carried out this attack.
But Alexander, don't you think you could do it counterintuitively? That if they definitively knew and could prove that Iran did it, then the implications of which would be obvious. And I don't think Trump wants to go there. He doesn't want to go there. And I think that's why he punted to the Saudis.
Yes,
I agree with you, but I'm saying that the exact opposite case can be made.
But that's exactly the point, Peter. I mean, at the end of the day, if you actually unpack that tweet very carefully, it contains incredibly fierce language. It appears to locked and loaded. It appears to suggest certain knowledge. But when you actually unpack it, it does no such thing. It introduces elements of doubt, and it makes the whole concept of an attack conditional upon the agreement of someone else. Now, coming to these facilities, these are gigantic facilities. Facilities of this size should be, if not invulnerable to attack, at least invulnerable to pinprick attacks. This is, as Peter said, a massively sophisticated, extremely well planned and well executed attack, which to my mind, I have to say this frankly, points to a professional and technological military to do this. I mean, I understand that, the Houthi have obviously claimed responsibility, but I have to say, they're exceptionally tough and resourceful fighters. They've shown that they possess ballistic missiles and even anti-ship missiles and homemade drones. But I would have thought this would stretch their capabilities beyond anything that they've shown before. And I have to say, I doubt that they would be capable of something on this scale. I mean, we have had 5% of world oil supply interrupted, Saudi oil production, or rather oil export, has been cut by half. I mean, this is a gigantic attack in its effect and in its consequences. And I think that must give a clue, I have to say this again, to who was ultimately behind it.
The interesting thing about the timing is that I think that let's unpack this in a very logical, and methodical way. I think it is reasonable to assume an attack of this scale took a lot of time, work, and effort, okay? It wasn't something that was just done on a whim, okay? But the timing of it is very interesting. We have the exit of John Bolton, and then we have Trump, you know, wavering as usual. Maybe that's part of his strategy, whatever, about the possibility of talking with Rouhani on the sidelines of the General Assembly that's coming up in New York. But if, you know, Trump is waffling there, and this is like 72 hours ago, this attack was planned much longer than 72 hours ago, all right? So is this pushing some kind of agenda to speed up the possibility of a surprise sideline visit, or is it just the opposite, to make sure it doesn't happen? Okay, because the timings don't connect. Okay, Trump's rhetoric. I think it's fair to assume that this attack took a lot of resources and time. So it's really interesting how all the players are going to react to it. But I'd like to point out to our viewers something that was said a few months ago by the Iranian president. That, and I'm paraphrasing here: if Iran can't export its oil to market, no one will. Let's keep that in mind, okay? And this could be very, and I think very likely, that what they're trying to do is to show that Iran has an asymmetrical strategy to deal with Saudi Arabia, and it's using as a conduit the Houthis in Yemen. This is a message to the Saudis. It's really over for you in Yemen. It really, really is over for you. And it's time for you to start talking. Now, it has been mooted and discussed, I don't know the details of it, that the US had picked up the mantle and would be in negotiations with the Houthis in Oman. And there's been suggestions that there's been pressure on the Saudis to attend those talks, which they said that they wouldn't go meet one-on-one or within a rounded table. That might change. But what we need to find out, and maybe we can speculate, after this attack, would they be more likely or less likely to wind down the war in Yemen? That's why this attack is so very important from so many different angles here. Not just trying to understand who did it, but what kind of political effect whoever did it wants to affect, okay? And that's what makes this fascinating and amazingly dangerous. And Alexander Mercouris is absolutely right. A large percentage of global oil export is in danger right now. What we're hearing is this is going to take more than a few days to fix it. And the facilities that were hit, this was amazingly sophisticated. Alexander Mercouris is right. This is a vast complex. Whoever perpetrated this knew exactly what they wanted to hit, exactly, with precision.
Well, Alexander, the Houthis, they said they did it.
Yes, they did.
So what do you make of that? I mean,
well, it is suggested.
It can't be a false flag if the Houthis say they did it.
No, it can't be. No,
it can't be. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we can discount that possibility completely. If the Houthis say they did it, that shows that it was Saudi Arabia's enemies. Now, the Houthis have been fighting this tremendous and extraordinarily tough resistance to the Saudi invasion of Yemen. We should use words properly. The Saudi aggression against Yemen, which has been conducted in a most barbarous and inhuman way. They've launched in the past missile strikes across the Saudi border. They've hit facilities within Saudi Arabia in the past. They are extremely tough, resourceful, disciplined fighters. They've kept the Saudis at bay. They've kept the Saudi Arabia's various allies at bay. They're not just the Saudi forces fighting there. The United Arab Emirates, which sent the army into Saudi, its army alongside the Saudi army into Yemen, has now pulled out. And of course, it's well known that the US and British special forces have been operating alongside the Saudis in Yemen, and they too have been bested, it seems, by the Houthis on many occasions. So that gives you an idea of how exceptionally tough as fighters the Houthis are. And of course, the Houthis are in some way aligned to Iran. Now, I have always been skeptical, and I remain skeptical, that the Houthis are themselves controlled by Iran to any great extent. I think it's problematic to call them Shia. I don't think they are really, properly speaking, Shia, as certainly not in the same sort of Shia denomination as the Iranians are.
Correct.
And I think the idea that the Iranians are pumping weapons into Yemen and arming the Houthis is extremely problematic, given the fact that Yemen has been basically encircled and besieged and blockaded. But there is a connection, undoubtedly a political connection, and perhaps an intelligence connection between the Houthis and Iran. So either the Houthis are an awful lot more sophisticated and have access to far more modern and advanced weapons and technology and far better planning than anybody up to now realized, or the connection with Iran is stronger than most of us suspected, and the Saudis really are the Iranians really are funneling advanced weapons and helping the Houthis to conduct their strikes against Saudi Arabia, which again, I still find difficult to believe, given how isolated the Houthis are. Or this could be, and I want to stress, I am using the words could be, because as Peter rightly said, I don't know, or it could be that the Houthis, by claiming responsibility, are giving the Iranians some degree of political cover for a strike that might have been launched from Iran. There is another possibility, which Peter touched on, which is that something was launched from within Saudi Arabia itself. If that is true,
and others are saying it's a possibility of Iraq as well. I wanted to throw that into the mix. Okay.
Yeah, well, there you go. But if it came from anywhere within Saudi Arabia, or indeed if it came from Iraq, then that would be well, first of all, that would multiply the crisis. It would suggest either that the Saudis are not in full control of their population and their territory, which has massive implications, or if it came from Iraq, then that begs the question of who in Iraq was doing this kind of thing. And are the Iraqis also now aligned with the Houthis and ultimately with Iran? And are we seeing an alliance between, a sort of general alliance starting to form, which would have major implications in of itself? I would point out that when Peter says that these people had the precise knowledge of where to strike and how to strike, this appears to have been a pinpoint attack on the most vulnerable parts of these installations. Somebody had exceptionally good intelligence about giant facilities. They also would have known or would have had the means to overcome the fairly sophisticated air defenses which the Saudis have installed around these facilities.
Patriot missiles, American-made.
Patriot missiles, indeed. So it does really look as if this was an extremely carefully planned and very well organized operation using very advanced technology. And, the implications of that in itself are extraordinary, and they show just how vulnerable Saudi Arabia now is. I think that's the biggest single takeaway from this thing. The Saudis have proved unable to repel this attack on two of their most important oil facilities. And now they're facing a crisis in their own ability to continue to produce oil. So it's a major crisis for Saudi Arabia. And it's, of course, something that demonstrates how far the situation in the Gulf has slipped out of American and Saudi control.
It's interesting also is again, the timing of it and making reference to tweets that Trump made at the end of last week with the firing or resignation of John Bolton. Is this, and we assume, for theoretical sake here, if the Iranians were behind it, is it a faction within the government? Is this something that the Rouhani and others knew about or aided and abetted or done behind their back? And the only reason why I'm mentioning that, because I'm just adding a few layers of the complexity that Alexander McKeer very skillfully just presented to us here. So there's so many different angles here. Again, kind of going right back to the beginning, it's fascinating to me, Trump's tweet about waiting for the kingdom to come to its conclusion. And it may very well be the kingdom is going to feel so terrified right now after this precision attack that it may reassess. But with MBS, you never know. The guy is he's a car wreck, that guy, okay? He's a car wreck. And it's his fault that Saudi Arabia is involved in this quagmire in Yemen in the first place. It was his idea here. It's also very interesting how Trump is out of sync with everybody else, as usual, in his own administration. Again, this is electoral politics for Trump. And whoever perpetrated this knows that. And it's putting him, it's shining a light on the box that Trump has put himself into. It's Trump's fault that he's in this political bind, because he walked into it and he closed off an exit. He closed off options. So he has to, does he want to look strong? If he wants to look strong, he might end up starting a regional war that it will go down in history for a very long time, because it will be quick and it will be very devastating, and everybody in the region will feel the effects, everyone. And I'm talking about Lebanon, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Iraq, the Emirates. I could go on and on.
Alexander Pompeo and Lindsey Graham, they've already come out and they said Iran did it. It's Tehran. And I think Lindsey Graham even took it a step further. Yeah, he says we need to strike Iranian oil fields. So who's running U.S. foreign policy on Iran right now? Who's the lead here?
I think it illustrates Peter's point about the extent to which Donald Trump has boxed himself in by taking this very, very strong anti-Iranian position, which wasn't obviously thought fully through, and the extent to which he's having trouble getting control of this situation. That's what his tweet shows, by the way. His tweet, as I said, appears to take a very strong line, which is there basically to appease the Pompeo, Lindsey Graham faction, which is very strong in the United States and which always wants war and conflict at every opportunity. And at the same time, as I said, it contains all these conditions, all these caveats, which clearly seem to be intended to give Donald Trump some degree of political space and wriggle room, if you like, so that he could try and find some way towards a less violent or really peaceful solution to this. But it's going to be very difficult for him, because he has raised expectations with many people in the United States about how a Trump-led administration would take the strongest possible position against Iran. And now he finds that he is now drifting into a conflict in Iran where of which he's not fully in control. He's not fully in control of the pieces that are moving, and which, as it turns out, may not be in his or in the United States' actual interests. So he's in a very awkward position. And when you ask the question, who is in charge of US foreign policy, I think at the moment, Donald Trump is the man who has to make the final decisions, but you get a sense of the enormous pressure he's under.
Also, is that if Trump takes Lindsey Graham's advice, like Lindsey Graham is such a strange guy, because on Kavanaugh, I cheered him on, but on foreign policy, he's the evil twin of himself. But if he takes Lindsey Graham's advice with surgical strike, I love how they use this language. You always kill people with strikes, okay? There's nothing surgical about it. But hitting Iran's energy infrastructure, Iran will return the favor, and it will not just be Saudi Arabia. It could include the Emirates as well. And then you face a global depression. Already, over the last few months, we have insurance companies that are more and more shy about insuring these tankers going through the straits there. And this is Iran's strategy. It is incremental, it is asymmetrical, It believes that it is already at war. Blockades and embargoes are an act of war under international law. Okay, so they feel that they are on a war footing, and they are reacting appropriately in terms of how they define their national interest and protection of their sovereignty. Let's not, Western media it's a hoax, another hoax. It's another Russiagate hoax, okay? When they discuss Iran, they do not go into the nuances whatsoever. What they do is they side with the Pompeo ex and former National Security Advisor Bolton's position here. And this is a really important point for me, because Western publics are not being well informed about this. This is a powder keg, and as we've said already, it won't take much more for this to really slide into a catastrophe. If you want to start trading pinprick blows, which is again ridiculous linguistically, it will get out of hand very quickly. Iran will say, our survival is at stake, and it will act appropriately. And Saudi Arabia has had a very sobering last 2 days, that it is so amazingly vulnerable. And the Patriot missiles that they bought, very expensive ones, they don't work, okay? And if we just take the Houthis, while sophisticated in their attack, Saudi Arabia has the third largest military spending in the world. Saudi Arabia, and if it can't shield itself from these kinds of attacks, then it's just good. It is just vulnerable for more of them. The level of sophistication here, from what I understand, and I'm not an expert in oil infrastructure, okay, but they have facilities. They duplicate a lot of the facilities right next to each other. So when one is under maintenance, one is working the entire time. This was so sophisticated that they took out the binary system, both of them out, okay? I mean, they knew exactly what to hit and where it would hurt the most. And if they can do it once, there's every reason to believe they can do it again.
Peter, I'm trying to understand why this is happening. And I mean, we have tariffs now. We have this tariff trade war with China. Trump announced that he's going to put more tariffs on the EU, especially on the aerospace industry. We have 2020 elections coming up. We just got done with Syria, and we're just trying to get over, 7 years of the conflict in Syria. John Bolton just got fired the other day. We have the UN General Assembly on the 25th. Is this being done because there's a feeling that there's no way in hell the United States and Saudi Arabia is going to start war with Iran, given that the world is heading into a recession and everything is going to shit? Or is this the exact opposite? And this is because it can restart everything and save the world from going to shit. So what do we need? A good war.
It's a very, very good. It's probably the most germane question to ask. Okay, again, there's so many layers of this here. Who perpetrated it? Is it to generate a greater conflict? Is A, which is a possibility, obviously, or B, is this the final warning? We need to step back from the abyss. Whoever did it is saying, this is a taste of what can come. Look at oil prices. They went up faster and more degree-wise since 1991. Okay, that's the message that is being sent. The ramifications and the outcomes of increasing, ratcheting up this are immense. And whoever did this is saying, are you awake? Because we are one step away. And is it a wake-up call to say, wow, this is a taste of how bad it can get? And if the kind of precision that we saw, that can be duplicated, and who knows what else? Okay, and the potential of other countries. I mean, we could envision tankers being blown up. I mean, at sea. Okay, and cutting off the oil supply altogether. It just that you don't have to hit just Saudi infrastructure. You can just shut down that strait. and then everyone is in trouble. So for me, this is, again, depending on the timing, and I hope one day we'll find out about it, is this a final warning? Saudi Arabia and your allies, get the hell out of Yemen now. And whoever is masterminding this knows there's enormous support in Congress to get out of Yemen as well. I mean, they're basically saying to Trump, this is a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer for you. Now, of course, others would say it's far more complicated. As Alexander Makiris rightfully described, Trump's under an enormous amount of pressure. He's the type of guy with his personality traits and backed up with American exceptionalism. Not one step back is their approach. And this is a mindset. Once you take a step back, then you have to retreat. And this is the mindset of the American military industrial complex. You don't cede anything. Okay. But if you don't do that, then you are vulnerable on so many different fronts. And then it turns into a cascade event. I wish I had a map with me right behind me, and I could show you step 1, step 2, how it could unfold. And once it starts, it's really almost impossible to stop.
And Alexander, I forgot to mention that Pakistan and India are also on the brink. I mean, it's everything seems to be going to hell.
Oh, indeed, yes. Well, I mean, the fact of the matter is that we have a period of extreme tension in international affairs, with the United States now increasingly conceiving of itself as involved in a Cold War with a Eurasian grouping led by China and Russia, and it's been pivoting towards Asia in order to sort of force this conflict with China, and it's been trying to draw India into this game, and that's created stresses between India and Pakistan. I mean, lots of things are going on all the time in many places. But as to the precise motivation behind this attack, that depends very much ultimately on who was responsible, and we don't yet know. I mean, if it was the Houthis acting by themselves, I think that their intention was to show to the Saudis we are not only strong and able to defend ourselves, but we are able to attack you, and we can press our attacks right into the deepest part of your the soft underbelly of your infrastructure, and therefore you need to end this war against us. That might be a plausible agenda if you assume that it was the Houthis themselves. If you assume it was Iran, then of course it becomes much more problematic. Firstly, Peter's absolutely right. This kind of operation is not dreamed up in an afternoon. It would take weeks and months to plan. It's obviously been very carefully planned over a very, very long time. However, someone would have, in that case, made a decision to go along with it, to allow it to happen, despite the fact that the diplomatic pieces appeared to be falling in Iran's favor, with Bolton dismissed and Trump apparently edging towards a summit with Rouhani. Now, was that intended to wreck that rapprochement?
Yep.
That would imply that there are factions within the Iranian government that are working.
Which there are.
Which there are, but I mean, are they so much in control that they are able to launch a sophisticated operation like this against the wishes of the country's president? I have to say, I still find that difficult to believe. Or is this, as Peter said, a warning? And I have to say, I incline to the view that it is a warning. I think that the Iranians have been, if it was the Iranians, would have been looking at the situation in the United States, saying to themselves, discussions there are very finely balanced. But at the same time, there's still clear indications of great hostility to Iran and a tendency on the part of many people in the United States to underestimate Iran, to fail to understand that unless there is a move towards peace with Iran, then indeed Iran does have the capabilities to strike back, and to strike back in the most forceful and effective way. And it could be, and it's not implausible, that some people in Iran, within the Iranian government, and with the full approval both of the president, Rouhani, and the country's leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, decided that it was necessary to give an example to the United States of how extensive Iran's capabilities are. I'm going to just say one thing about Iran. I've never visited the country, but I know many people who have, including Western people, and some of them by no means sympathetic to the current Iranian government. But what they always tell me is that this idea of Iran as some sort of third world country, similar to, say, Egypt or Algeria or whatever, it is really very wrong. It is actually a very sophisticated, very orderly, very industrialized place. If you go to a place like Tehran, it comes over as a modern city. And Iran, maybe it's not it's obviously not at the level of, say, Germany or France or Russia or the United States, but it is a much more sophisticated and much more organized country and society than I think many people in the West realize, including, I'm sorry to say, people in the US government like Lindsey Graham, who I think has profound ignorance of these issues.
Like Tom Cotton as well. It'll just take two strikes and it'll be over. What a moron. But Alexander McCure, Christopher, I'd like to kind of address your question. No. I think what's, you gave all these examples of what's going on in the world, but I think the answer to that is that it is another clear indication of the end of the unipolar moment. Because when you look at the Pakistanis, traditionally the American ally in that region, they're not listening to the Americans anymore. Maduro in Venezuela, he's not going anywhere. Okay, they don't fear the United States anymore. And the Israelis continue to act more and more unilaterally. Netanyahu is saying if he wins after the election, that we could see the annexation of the entire West Bank. The United States has no say in these things. There's a growing perception that the United States is losing its focus on global hegemony. And it's just, obviously it's rising of other powers. Okay, I mean, we can't deny that. Nothing stays the same. There's always change. But the U.S. is losing its grip, and that indicates to me the reason for the very belligerent language coming out of Washington, because they see this happening in front of their eyes, and it's happening very, very quickly. Look, all of the sanctioning against Russia we still, in the country I live right now, there is positive economic growth. It's not stellar, I'll give you that, but it's there, okay? So you can't choke these countries into submission. Also, Venezuela will not be choked into submission. I mean, what the worst thing is, you'll have a massive migration to the north, and if you have no wall, then you're going to have to experience the consequences of that, all right? China is not going to bend a knee. I'm sorry. Just like Alexander McCure just said, Iran, it's Persia, and it has a long, proud, rich history and culture and civilization. It doesn't bend the knee. And the Middle Kingdom of China is not going to bend the knee. All it's going to do is this belligerence coming out of Washington. It's only going to increase all of these tensions here. If Trump could have an epiphany and become the peace leader of the world, we could see a lot of tensions reduced. Not everything solved, but a lot of tensions reduced. And he could go down in history as a great peacemaker. All right. Of course, he would have to have a set of people around him that were like-minded and move forward, stop groveling to the Israelis, stop groveling to the military-industrial complex. But of course, they couldn't impeach him for Russiagate, for collusion, for racism. But if he were to become a peace candidate and a peace president, then they would get rid of him, because there's too many people in the inside the Beltway that just love the war economy and the politics of war around the world. This is the tragedy of our time, because no one can turn this around individually. I've always said it will have to take a massive catastrophe for people to really look at the world the way it is and not the way they want it to be.
Is that the where we're moving to, Peter?
Yeah. Well, I'll stay with my analysis that whoever was behind this is telling everyone what you saw over the weekend. That's not even a movie trailer for what could possibly come. And wake up. First of all, end the war in Yemen. And we know that the United Arab Emirates, they have a back door, they have a back channel to the Iranians, and now we have to take advantage of that. The U.S. needs a back channel. There's too much at stake here for misunderstanding. And like I said, I think this is a preview of what could come. And basically, everyone is saying, "Do you want to see this in movie theaters near you?" That's the question.
Alexander, oil. What's going on?
Well, it's rising. I mean,
so that's a broad.
we've had a huge surge in oil prices. I mean, bear in mind, Saudi Arabia is traditionally the world swing producer of oil. So the way that the OPEC cartel has worked in the past is that Saudi Arabia has pumped out oil in order to keep prices down when they're rising too fast, and it's cut back production when oil prices are falling and they need to be made to increase. Now, Saudi Arabia's position as the swing producer has declined. I mean, it's now being challenged increasingly by Russia and by the United States. So it's no longer the dominant producer that it was, 20, 30 years ago. But it's still a vital link in the oil chain. I mean, it's still one of the big three, along with the United States and Russia, in terms of oil production. And of course, beyond the fact that we've now lost half of its production, I mean, is no longer coming on stream. It's also got the other problem, which is, of course, it's not just Saudi Arabia, it's the whole Gulf. And if we have a crisis in the Gulf, then the Gulf of Hormuz is shut, or oil exports don't move from the Gulf, then, as I said, we will see a huge surge in oil prices, provided this thing doesn't escalate further. Yeah. Provided production is brought back to normal within the next few weeks. And Peter's right, by the way, the damage to these facilities looks like it was much more extensive than the Saudis are admitting. But provided everything is sorted out within the next couple of weeks, oil prices will fall back to normal. And we have currently a situation of global oversupply, especially if we are looking at a recession next year, which many people think we are. So the overall pressure on oil prices at the moment is downward, but it shows, what this incident has shown is how sensitive the oil market is, how central Saudi Arabia and the Gulf remain to the long-term oil price, and how it takes very little. Yeah. One attack is not actually, in the great scheme of things, so much to push oil prices up very far, very fast, with a massive damage to the oil, to the international economy.
But the issue here is it's now, we can always focus on price, and of course, if you're really dependent on oil, price is important. But the most important issue in the oil markets is predictability, instability. That's what's most important. And just as a sidebar to all of this, where I can chide Western policymakers, the more you fiddle with this type of thing, the more it helps Russia and Venezuela. Okay, so Russia's coffers, even if it's over for a course of a few weeks, you'll have tens of millions of dollars going into Russian coffers, okay? And Venezuela, it does get its oil to the market and it will have a higher price. So the law of unintended consequences is always out there, really close by.
All right, guys, let's get to some of the super chats. We have a lot of super chats to address, so let's get moving on those. Super chat from Sparky. Alexander, attacking Saudi oil fields causes oil prices to rise, helping Saudi Arabia much more than helping a sanctioned Iran. Seems like a false flag.
Yeah, but if they can't get their oil to market, then you can't sell it. So that doesn't make any sense.
As I said,
there's no logic to that.
As I said, and also, I mean, it's implausible that the Houthis would claim attribution for an attack which the Saudis had in actual fact carried out on themselves. That doesn't really make sense to me, at least not so quickly. So I can't imagine that the Saudis would carry out a false flag like this on themselves, exposing their own vulnerability to their many enemies in the Gulf. I mean, we talk about Iran and the Houthis. I mean, Saudi Arabia is not a popular country in the Middle East. There are lots and lots of people, including lots of people within Saudi Arabia.
They hate the royal family.
Who are, and if they see the Saudi regime weakening in some way, they will not be sorry, and that might encourage them to launch more attacks on it. So I cannot see this as a false flag attack. I think the Houthis would not have claimed it so quickly as one of their own if the Saudis had done it. And I just can't see the Saudis themselves doing it. And Peter's absolutely right. I mean, it does not in the end benefit Saudi Arabia to lose half its production. What it will lose, it might gain a little in terms of higher price of oil, though not enough, in my opinion, we're near enough to make up what it's lost financially in terms of. And of course, it loses market share.
It loses exactly, because the Russians, the Venezuelans, the Americans will pick up the slack.
Exactly. And if you've been following the oil market closely, and I appreciate it's a very geeky thing to follow the oil market, but
I do too.
I do, believe it or not. But I mean, if you do follow the oil market closely, you will know that there's been a major struggle over the last 5 or 6 years between these three big producers, Saudi Arabia, Russia, and the United States, over market share, with the Saudis, for example, pushed out by the Russians out of the Chinese oil market and facing heavy competition from the United States. So I don't see the Saudis doing this thing to themselves or colluding this thing happening to themselves. I mean, it really doesn't make sense.
And on top of that, if the plan is, as a false flag, is to get the United States into a hot war, a fighting war with Iran, well, Saudi Arabia will be turned into ash as a result. Okay, it will add, the Emirates will be absolutely destroyed. So I mean, it would be beyond the realm of imagination. But then again, MBS is
well, indeed,
not your typical guy.
Well, indeed. I mean, all I would add to that is, of course, if MBS really is behind all of this, which, as I said, I don't believe.
I don't either.
Then he's an even bigger idiot, frankly, than I thought he was. Because
he bought that yacht. Go to the yacht. Go to the Riviera. Leave us alone.
But I mean, this thing. By the way, talking about MBS, has been a personal disaster for him. I mean, the fact that Saudi oil facilities, such important oil facilities, are being attacked at the very time when he's been talking about selling shares in Aramco. That's the
very good point. Very good point.
In order to try to get Saudi Arabia's industrialization program, this grandiose megalomaniac industrialization program going. I mean, that is, I mean, it's an absolute disaster for him from every conceivable.
Yeah, that IPO is just dead in the water right now. And before these events, it was very problematic, and now, I mean, they're just going to have to postpone it. Nobody's going to want to buy a share of that company with these events going on. No. You want to buy something that's going to be destroyed by missiles the next day, or even before you take possession of it? No, again, I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's such an important element of this here. That is really a catastrophe for MBS, because that's how he was touting his way to modernization away from the medieval society that he runs.
Okay, super chat from Sparky. Bolton could still be pulling the strings, Peter, on the deep state while spending more time with his family, quote.
Well, there's a lot of Boltons around. You don't need Bolton to have Boltonism. Okay, he was just the best representative of it. No, there are plenty of people that will pick up the slack. No one. Okay, Bolton will be seen on MSNBC and CNN, but he'll be spilling his guts about confidential information left and right. But he's not pulling the strings right now. But unfortunately, there are plenty of people like him that are.
Okay. From Anthony Kaufman, Alexander, why is this not even on mainstream news?
Well, very good question. I mean, it should be, because this is by far the biggest single event in the world at the moment. It is extremely It is extremely important and extremely dangerous. But I think that tells you an awful lot about the state of mainstream news. I mean, here in Britain, we are utterly absorbed with Brexit to the point where we look at nothing else. In the United States, we have a completely phony story about Brett Kavanaugh.
Which is heartbreaking. Breaks my heart.
Exactly, which is already disintegrated, by the way, with the person who was supposedly involved saying that she knows no knowledge of it. So, I mean, that's already bitten the dust. We don't have news anymore and proper news analysis. We have instead sensationalism and rumor mongering and smears. That's why we set up the Duran, so as to provide the alternative, because this is the big news.
No, and also to both Alexes here, if they were to invest time and resources on this story, they would have to tell the American people what Saudi Arabia is really like. And do you want to spend taxpayers' money and lose American lives for this place, for this medieval place? And see, that's why when Saddam went into Kuwait, I mean, they didn't really tell us a lot about Kuwait, but I think Western publics had been told what kind of regime this is. It's like, oh, what's the point of spilling blood and resources for that? No, you'd have to talk about it, okay? You'd have to talk about it. And a thing that we haven't talked about here is that the very strong and growing more and more official Saudi-Israeli relationship, yes. Okay? And that's something that you don't really want to shine light on. The Israelis really don't, but though slowly but surely they are, and so are the Saudis. And as already been pointed out in our podcast here, so the royal family of Saudi Arabia is hated, absolutely hated in the Arab world, absolutely hated. Okay, and Saudi Arabia is a very unstable place. They like to show stability, and everything's under control. Well, I'll tell you, it's under control, all right, okay. But it's not a government; it's a family. It's a family that runs this place, and it is deeply, deeply corrupt. And there are plenty of people within the Saudi regime that don't have allegiance, but they keep their mouths shut and fear. But in the parts of Saudi Arabia, they're not Shia, they're not Sunni, they're Shia. And as Alexander McKeer has pointed out, maybe not from the same trajectory as Iran, but they identify as being Shia. And if you're Shia inside Saudi Arabia, you are nothing less than an enemy, and you're treated as such.
Okay, super chat from Azar Joma. No questions, but a £5 super chat. Thank you for that super chat. Peter, super chat from Penguins fan. Doesn't make any sense because Iran has nothing to gain by attacking a Saudi oil field.
Well, it does, actually. Okay. I mean, we have been very careful in this podcast. We are exactly almost 1 hour into it. We don't know who did it. And we're not, neither, none of the three of us are going to say. However, this attack does benefit Iran because the decision makers, particularly in Washington, are going to have to decide. And Trump did, in a way, with his tweet, what to do next. I mean, he showed not resolve, he showed hesitation, because this does benefit Iran at this moment, because it puts out in plain sight what possibly could happen next. And that what could happen next is a catastrophe that would be hard to describe, certainly hard to describe. So, I mean, the Saudis are saying markers are being laid and everyone can see them. Again, I will repeat, Rouhani said, if Iran can't get its oil to market, no one else will either. This attack backs that up. Again, not attributing causality here, because I don't know.
I think that's absolutely right. If Iran did carry out this attack, then if this attack was intended as a warning, which I think it almost certainly was, then I can see how some people in Iran, in the Iranian government, could calculate that warning, making that warning in this emphatic way is in Iran's interest. Bear in mind that, of course, the United States and Iran are not the only players. I mean, the Europeans would be horrified if there was a war in the Gulf at this time. I mean, they would be quite simply appalled. And from an Iranian point of view, a conflict between Iran and the United States could also consolidate support from Iran, from the Eurasian powers, from China and Russia. So I can see lots of possible reasons why people in Iran, if the Iranians were responsible, might calculate that in this particular situation that Iran finds itself in now, escalating the tension actually works to their advantage. I stress again, I'm not party to the decision-making process in Iran, obviously, and I don't know for a fact that this attack was carried out by Iran. But I can see how they might think it actually works to their advantage.
And on top of that, I mean, going with the same line of logic here, with the General Assembly meeting, the United Nations General Assembly meeting, in 9 days, the next 9 days are going to be full of stress and uncertainty, because is Trump, if he is the decision maker or has the strength to make a decision, can he convince his cohorts around him, we need to hold off, and make that clear to the Saudis also? Maybe there can be some kind of cooling down of tensions where everyone can win, because everyone can win if you don't go to war. Okay, that's a simple one. Okay, but if it's the exact opposite response, that is going to tell us a lot about what's going to happen next, because this will be a singular opportunity that may not come again.
Yes.
And will they grasp it? Or do we let the chain of events start unfolding? And once they start unfolding, they're hard to reverse and stop.
Yes.
That happens with every kind of conflict. I don't care what time or place in history. Once it starts picking up a momentum of its own, it's always about losing face, and there's hubris involved, and it usually ends up with catastrophe. The Western mainstream media this is a dereliction of professional duty. People have to understand the magnitude of what's going on right now.
Okay. Alexander from Penguins fan. From Toronto, Canada, Canadian government seized Iranian property and they pay off terror victims. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I got to say straight away, I think that's absolutely appalling, because whatever Iran is, it is not a sponsor of international terrorism. I mean, this looks to me like another attempt, which has been actively pushed by people in the United States, to attribute terrorism and international terrorism to Iran. Anybody who follows events in the Middle East closely, or at all closely, as we in Duran attempt to do, know that in terms of terrorism, Iran is not its supporter, is its victim and its opponent. It is the Iranians who have suffered from terrorism through all kinds of weird groups, like the MEK and people like that. And of course, it's also been a target of the fanatical Muslim Wahhabi fundamentalist groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS, who are deeply opposed to Iran. And Iran has fought them. So to actually seize Iranian property to compensate the victims of terrorism is actual flagrant theft, and carried out for the most dishonest and mendacious reasons. The sort of thing, I'm sorry to say, that I think Justin Trudeau is entirely capable of, but there we are.
No, he just goes with the flow. I think that's the clown of North America, right?
Justin Trudeau rant time. Peter, super chat from Sparky. Gina Haspel, Elliot Abrams, and Pompeo must go.
Yes.
Yes, but again, without being, I'm very partisan. Everyone knows that, but I think when our viewers look at these podcasts here, we have a flavor of humor and sarcasm, okay, and maybe a pinch there and a pinch there of meanness, because we're talking about politics. But to answer the question is that it's up to Donald Trump how he wants his administration to continue and his legacy.
Yeah.
And he has to come to some kind of defining moment about who's helping him and who's hurting him. Getting rid of Bolton wasn't, the only. That is just symbolic of what is wrong with his foreign policy and his foreign policy team.
Yes.
Again, it gets to the point of how much he has interest in these things. Does he think about them at all? We've said, on Crosstalk before we started the Duran, he's a transactional guy. Okay, he's not a strategic guy, and so he's looking to transact his way through foreign policy because that's how he thinks about the world. That's how he's lived his entire life, and the people that were mentioned, Pompeo, the head of the CIA. These people have their own agendas, and they're the agenda of the deep state and not of Donald Trump, not by any stretch of the imagination.
Okay. Alexander, super chat from Carolyn. Makes you wonder why they fired Bolton. If U.S. goes to war with Iran, will they pull in Europe, etc.?
Well, I think that Bolton, yes.
Luis Peter?
I'm here. I just got to get back in. Okay, I was getting messages. Damn it.
Okay. I think Bolton was fired for a multiplicity of different reasons. Obviously Trump and Bolton had their issues, and apparently they had a massive row the night before he was sacked, which was all about Iran, it turns out, or so it seems. But I think that Donald Trump, for a very, very long time, has been saying to himself, whilst Bolton is around, I'm not fully in charge, because Bolton is continuously undermining everything I do.
Leaking everything,
going behind my back, countermanding my orders so that I order troops to be withdrawn from Syria, and instead their numbers are increased. I want to broker a deal with Kim Jong-un in North Korea, and the North Korean embassy in Spain gets stormed. And I think it was too much for Donald Trump in the end. Unfortunately, Peter is absolutely right. There are many, many Boltons all across the bureaucracy. We shouldn't just focus on him. Pompeo and Lindsey Graham have been archhawks on Iran for a long, long time. There are many, many people in the US government, and indeed in US society, let's say frankly, who do not like Iran. And many of them.
Because they've been propagandized my entire life. I remember it. It's always the hostage crisis. Hostage crisis.
Exactly.
That's the ground zero.
Exactly.
Okay, and that is the alpha and the omega of what everybody knows about Iran.
Exactly.
Just that.
Exactly. And of course, within the United States government, there's also this very, very powerful and very resilient neocon group who seem to be there. However,
and the lobby, and the lobby,
these sorts of people. So, getting rid of Bolton may have helped Donald Trump personally in terms of getting out of his administration a person who, as I said, was frankly a treacherous and dangerous and who was undermining Donald Trump's authority. It may have removed from the administration the arch warmonger who is always looking for conflicts to wage, but it doesn't mean that the United States administration has been captured by the advocates of peace. Certainly not at all. And that's the reality, I'm afraid, we all have to face.
Okay, super chat from Sparky. Peter, same contractor maintains surveillance satellites and surveillance drones that maintain the video camera outside of Epstein's cell.
I can't answer that.
Well, you said about
but I have a good answer. I have a good answer for maybe a different question. There are just too many people in power that want this to go away. That's just a fact. It's just a fact. They just want it to go away. And it stayed in the media as long as it was titillating, okay? The bungalow on the island and the Lolita Express, it's all titillating and ghoulish and all of that. But they were only interested in the surface because too many people in power, particularly in the media, just don't want to go any deeper into this at all, okay? And, you had Ken Starr and you had Alan Dershowitz. I mean, I know it's your job as a defense lawyer to defend your client, but in the process of defending him, I have to believe that they know a whole lot more. But, they have non-disclosure agreements and all the immunity and all of that. But, I think from a common sense point of view, and Alexander McCurris and I have talked about even on Crosstalk here, where did Epstein get his money? Okay, that's when we know that, we know basically all the other puzzle pieces. But we're never going to really, it's already fading away. It's and one avenue that people are taking with the death of Epstein is they're going to go through the civil courts. So they will pick away at his fortune, okay? And they will some people will walk away with a nice piece of change, but it will be through the civil courts and not the criminal courts because there's simply no stomach for it. I mean, it went all the way up to the highest echelons of the Trump administration, Acosta, okay? I mean, that's how pervasive it is, okay? And when he said that he thought there was an intelligence connection there, I mean, my goodness, after 3 years of Russiagate and somebody makes a statement like that, don't you think the media would be, oh my goodness? No, it's only alternative media that people focus in on that, okay? The mainstream media is not going to touch it, okay? Because the more that's revealed, the more people will start asking very serious questions. And there's just too many powerful people and money that just don't want to go there. I mean, they insult our intelligence again. The cameras weren't working. Oh, the guards fell asleep. I mean, they had 15 safeguards and all 15, I'm making up that number, by the way. They all failed at the same time. I mean, how stupid do you think we are?
I mean,
his fortune. That's what
well, they are. But I was going to add.
They're going to take the money.
Yes, I was going to add to what Peter said. I mean, Jeffrey Epstein, who is that? I mean, he's
Yeah.
I mean, that's
I love
that's
it. Patrick Armstrong, he said about MH17. He said MH17 was the biggest story until it wasn't.
Yes.
And the same thing with Jeffrey Epstein. It was the biggest story until it wasn't.
I mean, the only thing that could change that is if there are indictments, in my opinion. But, will there be? We'll see. We will see. But certainly the media has shown no interest in pursuing that story.
Well, and that Maxwell woman, when they had that doctored picture of her in an In-N-Out burger place in California. I mean, somebody's doing this, okay? Yes. Somebody's manipulating this.
I know.
Okay?
And the other thing, which I find extraordinarily sad and very revealing, is that the Me Too people don't seem to be interested in pursuing the story either. Never have.
Well, the thing is with this story is that irrespective of your political leanings and of course Trump is the epicenter of everything, unfortunately, revelations about Epstein and his long life of crime, I think that's fair to say. Do you know what that would do to the body politic? I mean, Donald Trump was a reaction vote for people. Here's a guy that was divorced repeatedly, has said very demeaning things about women. I can go on and on and on, okay? And they still voted for him because he wanted to take on the elites, okay? Even though he's among the elites. But could you imagine Hollywood figures, political figures, media figures that were inside of Epstein's web? You know how people would react with that, the revulsion people would have against the elites. The elites don't want this to come out because so many people in position of power and influence could be not involved, but could be touched by it, which would be the same thing. Look at Kavanaugh. I mean, he's not even near anything and he's still accused. So the elites are terrified of the truth of Jeffrey Epstein and his house of horrors, okay? And that's why they won't do it. They won't go there.
Alexander, super chat from SM. I agree with Peter. Attacked planned well in advance. Oil and gas stocks have been on the move over the past few weeks while increasing almost 10% just last week alone.
Yeah, but as Alexander McCure has pointed out, the world is awash with oil right now, awash with it, okay?
Yes.
The thing is that how long will it take to make these repairs? I mean, it's kind of a moot point because you can fix it, but you have no defense against it happening again. That's why I keep repeating this. This is a warning. It's firing across the bow, and the Saudis certainly they will fix it, but it can be torn up just as easily again, and maybe even worse.
Exactly.
Again, it's about oil markets are not about prices. Oil markets are about certainty and uncertainty.
Yes. And the confidence of supply.
Right.
I would add one further observation, by the way, which is, of course, that Saudi Arabia's financial situation is incredibly precarious.
Very precarious. We use the same word, precarious.
Precarious. I mean, they're running supposedly their budget deficit is supposed to be 7% of GDP. Everybody knows it's actually much bigger. They are under a great deal of financial stress.
And billions of dollars
exactly.
every month for that war in Yemen.
Exactly. So from their point of view, as I said, disruption to their cash flow, which comes from an interruption of their ability to supply oil, is going to be a very, very difficult thing. I mean, I think that's the other thing to say. I mean, it's not only does Saudi Arabia look very vulnerable, but it is looking vulnerable at a time when, in some respects, it's been getting increasingly unstable. I mean, the fact that MBS has been running around arresting princes and locking them up in expensive hotels and extorting large sums of money out of them does not suggest, as Peter rightly said earlier in our program, a very stable country.
Peter, super chat from Sparky. A contractor could have worked on behalf of Yemen.
Sure. That's possible. But the amount of I tend to think that we're talking about satellite observations. We're looking at people that have an intimate knowledge of the oil industry inside of Saudi Arabia. I mean, knowledge is power, okay? And then you add missiles to it. I mean, looking at people that really know what they're talking about, and that is not in the mainstream media. I was aghast. I'll be really honest with you guys. I mean, it was only this afternoon, after I had my wonderful steak lunch, I began to read the details of the attack. I was blown away.
Yes.
I mean, I tend to think, and I want to be careful here, but that's really the expertise and the level of a government, not of some kind of like James Bond operation. It's too vast and it's too complicated.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I mean, I completely agree with that view. I mean, obviously, there are all sorts of so-called private security companies floating around, some of them very dubious. But I mean, short of having a sort of James Bond, Goldfinger, Blofeld, Spectre type person organizing this sort of thing, and those people don't exist in the real world.
We hope not.
We hope not.
We hope not.
But anyway, I mean, the only sort of people who could carry out an operation of this level of sophistication exist at the level of a government. I mean, you need somebody who is able to collect the intelligence, analyze the intelligence, has all the technology, has all the military gear, the missiles, the drones, has the ability to control those drones, is able to plan an operation of this level of sophistication, which points to a substantial staff, sort of military staff able to do this thing. This looks like a government. I mean, I have to say.
And if it was launched within the confines of Saudi Arabia, Saudi intelligence is in really big trouble. Okay, really big trouble.
Very big trouble. Absolutely.
We have a super chat on that. A super chat from Jendar and from Julian. Peter, is it possible to mute while vaping?
I've considered it. Yes, I just don't have the button on my
You need the
earphones.
on the earphones. Okay. So
I'll put it down.
You'll put it down. There you go.
After the many complaints, I have to admit.
Complaints. So, some people are saying vape on. I'm scrolling through the chats right now.
I just won't hold it. Okay. All right. I'll hold this instead.
Did you hear the news about the vaping, the reports, Peter?
Yeah, but if you go a little bit deeper, it is the liquids that people use, and a lot of it is laced with marijuana oil. Okay, so that's really what it is. It's people choking on marijuana.
They're buying over the counter laced with
No. You can add it yourself, and people. I mean, I have a friend of mine that manufactures it. I don't buy this in a store. A friend of mine makes it. Okay, at work at RT, and because you can determine the level of nicotine in it. Okay, but if you put what's the chemical for drugs?
HTC or HTC?
HTC. Okay, that is what people are putting into it, and that's essentially one of the things. While we're talking about vaping, vaping is a wonderful substitute for cigarettes. It really is. And I encourage cigarette smokers to at least give it a try. The downside of it is when you smoke a cigarette, you finish it and you put it out, right? Mm-hmm. But this never ends. So you're getting more, okay? You're just not getting the tar into your lungs. You are getting nicotine, okay? And some people can have very, very strong, mine's very mild, okay? But the thing is that yes, it is addictive. Yes, it is. It's not good for you. I don't suggest people trying it if they're non-smokers. If you're non-smokers, it's a good way to taper off. Then you have to learn how to control this. So this is my vape confession to the world, okay? I should quit, and I'm thinking about it. It turns into a habit. You don't even realize you're doing it.
THC.
Sorry, thank you, THC.
Yeah, THC.
You can see I have nothing to do with drugs. Okay.
And the glycerine and other carriers are bad. That's what Lemma said. The glycerine.
Well, the thing is, it's just like with the official makers of these liquids here. They learned the trick of the tobacco industry. So when cigarettes get more and more expensive, what they do is they make it more and more potent. Well, I can remember years ago, before I quit smoking, I smoked like Russian Marlboros, okay, or Russian Winston. And then a friend of mine did a report on American and British tobacco companies, and she got a block of real American Marlboros, and she gave it to me because she didn't smoke. And I remember taking the first one, and I got such a buzz off of it because they put so much more punch into it. So and that's because the prices get higher, so people want to get a really powerful hit. The tobacco industry is very insidious, okay? And some people that make the liquids for this are no different.
All right. Thank you, Jendar and Julian, for that super chat. And we'll leave it with Richie the Forky. THC, CBD. THC gets you high. CBD is great for you. And we'll leave it there and get back to the politics of it. So thank you for those super chats. And let me get back to, oh boy, where did I leave off? Peter, Trump's super chat from AJ Rodriguez. Trump stated in 2014 the Saudis should fight their own battles. Why is the U.S. so ready to go to war for the Saudis and their oil?
It's a really good point, but then that really gets down to the point of Trump's hyperbole. Okay. I'm sure in Trump's mind, he could square the circle, but our questionnaire is absolutely right. I remember that. I read antiwar.com religiously every single day they post. They don't work during the weekend. And I can remember a number of short articles by Jason Dietz over there focusing in on that. And the MBS was very offended by it, worried by it. And now Trump, that's just hyperbole from Trump, okay? I don't think we can read much into it, but it's a good observation.
Super chat from Penguins fan Alexander. Yemen is completely blockaded by sea. So how will Iran be involved with the Houthis?
Well, indeed. I mean, I made the same point earlier in the program. I don't really believe that the Iranians are supplying the Houthis with sophisticated weapons and technology. I don't see how it can be done I mean, it would be an extraordinary thing. Nobody has explained how it is happening, if it is happening, and I don't personally think it is happening. That's my own personal view. That's why I have to say I don't think it. I think it is unlikely that it was the Houthis who were behind this thing, unless, as it turns out, the Houthis are even more sophisticated in their warfighting capabilities, far more sophisticated in their warfighting capabilities than I think anyone else had up to now imagined.
You know, I think we should point out, just as a point of reference, is Iran in one form or another aiding the Houthis? I think that's fair to say they are. How they are, I don't know. However, there is no evidence or meaningful evidence that Iran was behind the Houthis before the Saudi illegal invasion. So it is the sense of causality is wrong in Western media. Before the connections, because as it's already been pointed out in this our program here, is that the form of the Shia religion is practiced by the Houthis and people in Yemen is not of the same strain of the religious faith that is practiced in Iran. I mean, it's not that they're antithetical, but they're just variants. Okay, the enemy of my friend is my friend. Okay, I mean that's time honored. Okay, and this, of course, there would be elements within the Iranian military and political establishment would see this as an opportunity. So what Saudi Arabia did was, in one form or another, invite Iran into Yemen. And there's, yeah, I mean, I've been confronted with this on Crosstalk a number of times. I mean, if there's a blockade, how do they get things in there? Well, it's called smuggling, okay? And in a war zone, there's always people willing to make a buck by smuggling, okay? In Prohibition, a lot of American politicians made a lot of money because it was banned, okay? And so when you have a blockade, everything gets more expensive, and that's how stuff like that gets through.
Oh, I'm sure that's right, Peter. But I mean, sophisticated cruise missiles.
Drones,
I mean, that's on this scale.
But of course, from the tanker wars in the 1980s, what was Iran's one of their takeaways? Small submarines. They have a vast small submarine.
They absolutely. Okay? That's absolutely true.
And that's because of the Americans did that. Okay, so cause and effect. Okay, and learning curve.
Yes. That's absolutely right.
Larson says the Houthis are capable ex-Yemeni army officers. Alex.
Oh, yes. I mean, as I said, I have no doubt about this. I mean, they've shown repeatedly, I mean, this is something we discussed earlier in the program again. They are very tough, very resourceful fighters. And of that, there is no question. I mean, as I say, they've not only defeated the Saudis and the Emiratis and all sorts of other local armies, but I mean, they've also apparently successfully fought US and British special forces. So we are talking about very tough fighters indeed, very well organized. But this is something, this attack that we have seen is something else again. As I said, it implies not just an ability to obtain intelligence and to about these installations and to plan an attack of this kind, but it requires huge resources of analysis, of coordination, of logistics. It's not straightforward at all to carry out a precise attack like this. I'm not saying definitely it wasn't the Houthis. I don't know. But I come back to what I said. If it was the Houthis, then their capabilities are much greater than anybody up to now had imagined, especially given the fact that these facilities are, I believe, 1,000 kilometers away from the territory they control.
You have to look at what happens. You know, Arab armies are notoriously inefficient and corrupt. Okay, and what happens is we can look at what happened in Syria, and we can see what's happened in Yemen. When an onslaught from the outside, using use of proxies, these governments quickly find out who is competent and who is incompetent, who is greedy, and who is not part of the cause, as it were. And Syria learned that the hard way. You know, people that were just hanger-oners, you know, family connections and all that, they learned the hard way that if you're not useful for the cause, we don't need you. And if you're caught smuggling and conducting corrupt practices, you can get in really big trouble, irrespective of who your family is. See, what it does is it makes you lean and mean and very, very determined. And this is something the Saudis will never have, okay? They'll always have someone else do their dirty work for them.
Yes.
Peter, a super chat from Penguins fan. How did Saudi air defense systems miss this attack?
That is the whole thing. I mean, again, you have a country, Saudi Arabia, that spends it's in third place for defense expenditures in the world. I mean, that place is full of military hardware and sophisticated. Well, apparently, it can't see some very unsophisticated drones and other missiles. They just fly right under it. 1,000 kilometers. Think about that, and they couldn't see it. They couldn't see it. So all of those hundreds of billions of dollars they spent have been for naught. It's been wasted. Okay.
So what does that tell you guys? I mean,
And that's, again, I'll go with my thesis, is that here's this colossus, you know, David and Goliath, and the colossus is so terribly exposed.
Yes.
I mean, again, we can't overstress how precise the targeting was. I mean, when I first saw it on Fox News, it was like somebody had just got lucky and it got through, okay? And it was one bomb. It got lucky and made it. And now the real sourcing of it is that, as we have said for now an hour and a half, is that the magnitude of the planning and logistics really should blow your mind.
Yes.
Because the Saudis are absolutely, completely vulnerable. And so is the whole global oil economy. That is a wake-up call, because whoever did this, I think it's reasonable to assume they can do it again. And maybe this was just the opener. Maybe that's what they're telling you. This is an opening of what could come. This is a crisis that, you know, really should make you worry at night. Seriously.
Yes.
Alexander, going off on that, you can follow up on what Peter said, and going off on that, a super chat from Sparky. Israel knew the layout and would help semi-ally Saudi Arabia with their inside job at the Saudis' request. Maybe they did too good a job. And also thank you, Mr. Mika, for your super chat as well.
Yeah.
So Alexander,
I don't buy it.
Yeah, I mean, going off what Peter said, Alexander, and then addressing Sparky.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to say about this is, I've been talking about Saudi Arabia and its air defenses, and its the complete failure of its air defenses. You can have as many advanced weapons as you like. You can fill Saudi Arabia with the most advanced weaponry on earth. But if you don't have a properly trained, properly organized, properly structured, properly disciplined military, then those weapons are not going to work properly. The fact also is that the Saudis buy so many weapons from so many different sources that the interfaces often don't work very well. I think a thing to understand.
Are you saying they're incompetent, Alexander?
Yes, they are. They are incompetent.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, look at Yemen. I mean, I don't think it has ever produced any evidence, Saudi Arabia, that it has effective armed forces. I mean, it may have had an effective tribal militia in the 1920s, but today it does not have a proper military, not in the sense that we understand it. Now, can I just also say something else about Saudi arms buying, which is, I think, not always well understood? The Saudis buy lots and lots of weapons, not with any intention to use them, but as a kind of sophisticated form of bribery in the West. They buy friends. They buy friends with the arms companies. They buy friends with the lobby groups. They buy friends from with politicians. And an awful lot of this money that is used to buy these weapons sluices around in Western capitals and creates what I'm going to say straightforwardly is corruption. I mean, we had a most extraordinary episode some decades ago in Britain where a British minister, Jonathan Aitken, was hosted by some Saudi princes in the Ritz Hotel in Paris, and it was all supposed to be kept secret. And he lied about the fact that they paid the hotel bill and eventually went to prison over this. But I mean, this is just a tiny little taster of what goes on. There is a huge amount of things like this going on. And when corruption is the driving force behind buying weapons rather than actual defense, you are not going to get really effective and professional armies out of this. Quite apart from anything else, the Saudis, as Peter said, they have many enemies in Saudi Arabia and in the Middle East. The very last thing they want is an institutionally strong military that might potentially pose
threaten it
to their regime. Given that, of course, the greatest danger to monarchical regimes in the Middle East in the past have been the military and the military's ability to carry out coups. There was a very, very famous and bloodthirsty coup in Iraq in 1958, where the military overthrew the monarchy there. And the Saudis will not want a well-organized or strong military that could possibly pose any kind of challenge to them. So we are not talking about a well-organized and sophisticated military. Yes, they do have contractors. They bring in contractors from Pakistan. It's well known. Many Pakistani contractors have fought for them in Yemen. They brought people from Israel. I've no doubt about the fact that there are people from Israel in Saudi Arabia. That does not an effective military make. And again, I have to say that I find it very difficult to believe that the Israelis would collude with the Saudis or with anyone else in an attack that would make their own ally, their own key ally in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, look so desperately vulnerable. I like Peter, I just don't buy it.
And to echo something that Alexander McCura said, kind of put a bow on it, is that the fact that the Saudi military is so incompetent and made incompetent intentionally, allowed to be incompetent, any competent military in Saudi Arabia would have never invaded Yemen. They never would have gone down this path. They never would have done it. And that's why it was not a military decision. It was some kind of fanatical decision by MBS. It would be, what would it be called? A short, splendid war, which anyone that believes in that is paid back in spades, okay? But Alexander McCurris's characterization of the military and military contracting is absolutely spot on.
Peter, a super chat from AP. Peter, there are talks of establishing an Iranian Kurdish state post a possible Iran invasion. Is there a pattern here after Iraq and Syria?
Well, I think,
and not done with the question. And is this eventually going to Turkey?
Okay, let me see if I understand the question. Okay, if there were a conflict with Iran, would there be a Turkish state carved out? Is that the question?
And is there a pattern after Iraq and Syria?
Yeah, I mean, of course, that would be part of the absolutely. That would absolutely be part of a contingency plan that somebody in the Pentagon spends their entire life working on, how to break up Iran along ethnic lines and possibly create a Kurdish state. I mean, that is probably the only. There are a lot of states, a lot of people in the world that have statehood within their grasp. It's not the Kurds, okay? They're unfortunately on the wrong side of the historical ledger. But to answer the question, of course, that contingency plan would be there, of course, because we saw that after Bush 43 with Iraq, and basically creating the autonomous zone of the Kurdish autonomous zone, which was left unaffected. Okay, I mean, and that's one of the reasons why Kurds in the other countries in the region believed that some form of statehood was possible, because for all intents and purposes, the Kurds inside of Iraq did pull it off. They have a state lit, okay, and that would be the model for Turkey, for Syria, and Iran. Yeah.
Alexander, following up on that super chat, I saw that AP also posted a question in the chat. I want to follow up on that question. And it is, what is Putin Rouhani doing in Ankara?
Well, good question. I mean, I think
going through the dance again.
Yeah.
I mean, the point about
Yep.
Putin, Rouhani, and of course Erdogan. We must never forget Erdogan. And can I remind everybody that I always called him Erdogan because I can't pronounce his name properly. I can't manage this R.
Well, maybe this is time for confessions because I can't say nuclear. Okay, I get that every single time. I get that every single
It's
time.
Erdogan is the problem.
Erdogan. Yes, but
And
people in the chat, if there's anyone from
Ronald
Turkey.
Reagan used to always say government. Not government. He said government. Okay.
Government. So as I said, I apologize for getting the man's name wrong, but I mean I'll stick to it because as I've tried many times. I just can't manage it. But at the end of the day, I think the reason those three get together in Ankara and all those places is firstly to sort out Syria, which is for the Russians a major priority, and of course both Iran and Turkey in their different ways are major stakeholders now in achieving Syrian peace. But also, and I think that we're gradually starting to see this happen, with Iran, it is to gradually integrate Iran into the Eurasian community of nations. I mean, there's been talk about this massive deal that is supposedly being done by China and Iran, which I believe in, by the way. I think that the reports about that are almost certainly true. And I think there's also a certain tendency now to draw Turkey into that complex also. And it has turned out recently that the reason the Turkish economy has stabilized after the financial crisis of last year is because it's actually received an awful lot of financial help, not just from its former allies like Qatar, but from China and from Russia, that the Chinese in particular provided Turkey with a very big loan. So there's all that game being played simultaneously as well. But of course, the Russians are going to be extremely concerned about these latest developments in the Gulf. And I'd like to say something here, because obviously, and Peter's absolutely right, one country that always benefits economically, in the short term at least, if oil prices rise, is Russia. Russia is very, very, very insulated now from oil price falls.
Yeah.
They've actually released a report which shows that the Russian economy could carry on quite effectively, even if oil prices now fell to $25 a barrel. So they've taken lots of steps to protect themselves about this. They don't need a high oil price in the way that the Saudis need a high oil price, or the shale producers in the United States need a high oil price, and they have been resistant to oil cuts.
And they have their current budget uses the estimation of $49, way below what it is right now. But that's how they base their budget, is really being very conservative. Sorry, keep going.
Absolutely. But that doesn't mean that they want a war in the Gulf or want to see oil prices rise. They would be horrified by a long, drawn-out war and conflict in the Gulf, so close to their own borders and in an area which they consider to be a vital national interest to themselves. So you can be absolutely sure that as of this moment in time, the Russians will be talking as urgently as they can to whoever is prepared to listen, trying to find ways to ramp this conflict down. And already they are urging restraint upon all the parties. And you can be sure that the telephone lines between Moscow and Tehran are at the moment buzzing.
It always falls onto Lavrov's shoulders, doesn't it? It always ends up on his shoulders.
And here he is, in fact.
Yeah, there you go. There's the plug for purchasing a magic mug in the Duran shop. That mug says what? We love Ralph, right?
We love Ralph. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, the Duran shop. Pick it up. Help support the channel. And AP and Grokster say, Alexander, it's Erdogan.
Oh, I know.
He knows what it is.
I know what it is. As I said, I apologize. I just can't do it. I've tried. I have tried.
Thank you, Grokster. Thank you for that super chat. Peter from Sparky, super chat. Dead man switch. Bolton fired, switch thrown.
I don't understand.
Well, I guess Sparky is saying that getting Bolton out has actually allowed Trump to, or the powers that be behind Trump, to flip the switch to create conflict with Iran. I guess that's what you're saying, Sparky. If that's not,
but I mean,
so,
but then what?
chat.
But again, I mean, just to kind of stress, and I think Alexander McCurris and I are on the same page here. I can't see how Bolton is in the mix here, because this attack had to at the very least weeks, if not months, in the making. Okay, and so Bolton was around then. Okay, I mean, it's an interesting news line in after the fact that Bolton is gone. Okay,
unless Sparky is saying that Bolton flipped the switch before he left. Unless that's what you're saying, Sparky.
You guys want to see that you guys are going to have to give me a lot more information. I mean, I'm always open to changing my mind, but I think that we have a pretty coherent timeline and causalities on this program here. I don't see it as a false flag. Okay, always remember, you guys, when somebody takes credit for it, almost by definition, it isn't a false flag.
Yes.
Not always, but by definition, almost.
I have to say I agree. I mean, I can't imagine Bolton arranging an attack, a false flag attack on Saudi Arabia, and getting the Houthis, who are fighting the United States, to take credit for it. I mean, it's too complicated. I mean, I can't see how such a thing could happen. And like Peter, I'm intensely skeptical. I mean, unless I see proof, of which at the moment I see none.
I don't know, Peter, Alexander, do you guys know, how do we confirm that this was the Houthi leadership?
Yes, it's an official statement.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so there's no doubt about it that the
Absolutely.
Houthi have.
Absolutely.
The Houthi have taken responsibility for it, okay?
Right.
Instantly afterwards, okay?
Absolutely.
I mean, as soon as it happened, they came out with it. No one else did.
Exactly.
Okay, great. Let's get back to the super chat. Thank you, Sparky, for that super chat. Alexander from Penguins fan. Should Russia now give Iran S-400 since the U.S. will strike Iran?
Well, we don't yet know that the United States will strike Iran, but it's distinctly possible they may do. But I don't think that the Russians will rush S-400 missiles to Iran now. First of all, Iran hasn't asked for those missiles, so one can't force them to accept something they haven't requested.
Not like what the Americans do with everyone.
Indeed. Secondly, I mean, you can't just move sophisticated weapons into a country at that kind of speed. You need to provide the personnel to start to man them, and that would have to be Russian personnel. And I don't think there's any possibility of the Russians putting their own military in the line of fire to protect Iran at this time. And thirdly, I'm not convinced that at the moment they're needed anyway, because what people don't seem to realize is that Iran actually now has a fairly sophisticated air defense system, at least by regional standards. So I don't see that the S-400s would add a significant capability. If the United States attacks Iran, then I can see how things might change. I can see how, depending on what the fallout is, the Iranians might approach the Russians and say, we need to upgrade our capabilities. And at that point, the Russians might do something like what they did in Syria, which say, very well, in that case, we will provide you with more sophisticated weapons. We are not there yet. It may never happen. So let's not speculate too far in advance of events.
I think it would be fair to say that if we see this cascade effect going into conflict, I think certainly the Russians would afford intelligence assets, so they could actually eyes in the sky. I mean, give Tehran the ability to see what's coming at them from where, and that would actually help them react much better. I would have to assume that if that's not in place, it's a contingency that could be easily put into place.
Absolutely. Bear in mind that the Russians very recently started to refer to Iran for the first time as an ally, and that does potentially open the road for greater military cooperation, especially at an intelligence level. I very much doubt that it's happening to any very great extent at the moment now. But if there is a conflict, it could go exactly the way Peter says. There could be many more contacts, and the Russians could very easily provide Iran with all kinds of intelligence, which the Iranians would not be able to collect by themselves because they don't have the sophisticated satellite systems and the radio monitoring devices that the Russians have.
Okay, super chat from Kevin Belcher. Saudi just came out and said it was Iran, #war.
Well, there we go.
So I don't know if this is.
Well, I mean,
Does this mean there's going to be a strike? A U.S. strike?
I think that's a big question because
Yes.
Guys in the chat, if you think there's going to be a U.S. strike,
if there's a direct strike and the U.S. admits it was behind the strike, then we will start this tit for tat.
Yes.
Mark my words.
Yes.
This
if
will
Saudi
start.
comes out and says it was Iran, Peter Alexander, Saudi comes out and just says like what Kevin says, it was Iran. Does that mean the U.S. has to do something?
That's the wrinkle. That's the wrinkle right there. Okay,
Yes.
That's the wrinkle. Again, let's not forget we have 9 days until the General Assembly of the United Nations meeting. We have a 9-day window now. This is my hypothesis. Okay, is Trump going to order a strike and hope that there could be some kind of communication with the Rouhani? That is a big if here, because again, I keep stressing it here and on Crosstalk. Iran sees itself on a war footing already. Okay, and if there's a direct strike from the United States and the United States admits to it, then that's throwing down the gauntlet. Remember, the recent strike on Saudi oil infrastructure the responsibility was taken by the Houthis. Okay, so this is asymmetry again. I think Donald Trump would be amiss. It would be a terrible failure because he cannot control where it will go next. And considering the trust, what was it, the brain trust that he has surrounded himself with, Donald Trump, you're in real big trouble because your guys are playing checkers. The Iranians are playing three-dimensional chess. So be careful. Oh, and by the way, Mr. President, you're running for re-election. Remember you said you wouldn't do something like this? That's the rock in the hard place for Donald Trump. Donald Trump is when he's at his best when he's pursuing self-preservation. He is given too much control and power to people that don't give a damn about his preservation.
Right, Peter, I think people agree with you, Alexander. I'll let you weigh in. People agree with him, Alexander. There probably won't be a strike. There are some people that are saying there will in the chat, but most people, I think, are agreeing with Peter saying there will be no strike, regardless of what Saudi Arabia says.
I mean, my own view is that it depends on Donald Trump, but can I just say a few things about the Saudi response? Firstly, I mean, I always expected, if I have to be frank, that the Saudis would blame Iran.
Oh, big surprise there.
I mean, no great surprise. I mean, for MBS to say that it was the Houthis would be
so embarrassing.
Embarrassing, exactly. I mean, it's inconceivable that he would have done that. But having said that, it is very interesting that he has waited so many hours before saying something like that. I mean, it shows, I think, again, how nervous he is about this. I mean, you would have expected him to rush out, a claim that it was the
and already their own strike. They would have done it themselves.
Well, indeed,
self-defense,
or something like that. Exactly. So, I mean, it exposes again Saudi Arabia's nervousness and vulnerability in this situation. As to whether or not there will be a strike, it depends. It really can't be stressed too much. It does depend in the end on Donald Trump. He is the commander-in-chief. Now, there are multiple options you can take in this situation, which do not involve a strike. You can send the US military into Saudi Arabia to beef up Saudi Arabia's own air defenses, which we've seen are terrible. I mean, that's an option.
But that would be terribly embarrassing as well.
Exactly.
After spending hundreds of billions of dollars, you have to have your patron come in and save you. Save
I
the
know.
royal family of Saudi Arabia.
Exactly. Whether it's a good, as I was going to say, whether it's a good option, I don't know, but it's an option. There are other possible options you can think of. You can talk to the Iranians. You can talk to the Russians and ask them to broker some kind of a compromise or something like that. There is no doubt at all that Donald Trump is under a great deal of pressure to launch a strike against Iran. There are all sorts of people, Lindsey Graham, we've talked about him, Pompeo, I'm sure, all sorts of people like that. I suspect the uniformed military in the United States, the Pentagon, are dead against it. They have game planned for this. From their point of view, they are worried about the very cascade effect that Peter was talking about. And of course, the politics of this almost certainly will not play well with Donald Trump's own base, especially that large part of the base, which consists of the military and their families, who voted overwhelmingly for him in 2016 as the person who would end wars. So he's got to balance the various pressures on him, and he does have a variety of options. All I will say is he's a very difficult man to read. He's made mistakes like this before. He launched 2 strikes on Syria, which certainly were wrong, certainly were misconceived. The one after the attack on Khan Sheikhun, and the one after the attack on Douma. And I hope that wisdom prevails, as it did the last time when he nearly came to the brink of doing that. I hope it does. I think, like most people who are commenting, that it will. I am not sure, and I'm sorry to say, that in this kind of situation, with this very feverish atmosphere that we're seeing, if there is an attack on Iran, I will be extremely worried and very concerned, but I will not be surprised.
And we'll have to look back over some past podcasts here. Alexander and Christopher, there was, a dozen simulations that the Pentagon has done with war games with Iran, and every single time the Pentagon lost. Remember that? Remember talking about that?
Yeah.
So that's something. Also, I think Alexander McCurris is right. I mean, you're going to have a lot of bells and whistles. More advisors, maybe send over some more air defenses. But that shows the weakness of Saudi Arabia and its leadership, and that's what people are going to see. That's certainly what's going to be seen in the region. Okay, it's going to see weakness. Yes. And the fact that the Houthis took responsibility for it. One of the poorest countries in the world, and Saudi Arabia is one of the richest. It sends a message all over the place. What also could happen is that we could see the shenanigans with the tankers again. Okay, I think that's very likely to happen, is to inflict more pain. See, the advantage that the Iranians have over the Saudis and the Americans is that the Iranians have for years, if not decades, thought asymmetrically.
Yes.
And the Saudis can't do, they're too incompetent, okay? And the Americans, they have just too many commitments in the Middle East. They have to prioritize them. Israel, Saudi Arabia, a base in Qatar, Qatar's out of the Gulf Council. I mean, on the American Saudi side, they're all bickering among themselves. The friends of Iran in the region are not bickering; they're in line. See, one side is organized and focused, and the other side is disorganized with too much money, too many egos, and too many people that want to play armchair generals. All right, that's the dangerous situation we have here. There will be a response. Trump and his people will call it a victory. They're like Klingons, right? What you just declare victory and go home, okay? And we could talk about. I'm a big Trekkie fan as well. So I think this is how it's going to be. Donald Trump would be amiss to do anything too rash, because it'll all just cave in on him at home. Okay, the Middle East and its problems will continue, but Donald Trump's administration won't be reelected.
Yes. I mean, I think just to say, Peter makes a very, very valid point about a conflict with Iran, which is that the US military looks at the moment extremely overextended. I mean, they're in an arms race in the Pacific with China. They've got themselves into a confrontation in Europe with Russia. They've got themselves involved in all kinds of things with Syria. They've built up their forces in Africa, of all places. I mean, I can't really see why they're there in Africa, but they are in Africa.
Everywhere in Africa.
Exactly. They're talking about challenging the Russians in the Arctic. Again, why they would want to challenge the Russians in the Arctic, it's difficult to see. Do they really want to take on an industrialized country of 80 million people, which is what Iran is, in its own neighborhood? I mean, it doesn't seem to me like a wise policy at all. And let's not forget, I mean, the American deployable land army is about 10 divisions strong. I mean, it is very, very powerful, but it is not unlimited. You can only ask these people to do so much before they begin to feel extremely overextended and overstretched. I am sure that the generals in the Pentagon will be horrified if they're asked to enter and to get involved in a war with Iran.
Mm-hmm. And we've already accented here the very virulent anti-Iranian propaganda that the American public is exposed to. Having said that, there's no stomach for another big war. Not at all. No. Not at all.
Well, quite.
Okay, Peter, super chat from Indigo Jones. The president can make first strike, but only Congress can declare war. At a time when Dems are pushing a Green New Deal, how do you think the Dems will respond?
Well, I mean, again, my enemy's friend is my the friend of my enemy is my enemy. I know I can get it right eventually. Anyway, would the Democrats want Trump to go into a war because they know it would be unpopular? You have to always think counterintuitively, okay? And the Dems are just so, they're so tongue-tied and tripping over their own shoelaces. You know, now John Bolton's a hero. What happened? 18 months ago, he was the devil incarnate for them. I mean, that's a wild card as well. But you're in a bad place. You're in a bad political place if you want your president to fail and have American military personnel exposed to conflict, wasting hundreds of billions of dollars because you don't like the guy in the Oval Office. That's how bad things are.
Yeah. I think actually, though, the point is a good one, because I mean, given that, I mean, this would be an open goal for the Democrats. I mean, they could say that Donald Trump got himself into this mess by tearing up Obama. Let's remember Obama, the great, saint Democrat president of, the deal that he did with Iran, and perhaps they would try and push a spoke in what he's trying to do by invoking the War Powers Act and all the laws that involve Congress.
Yeah, that's a good point. But I think, unfortunately, there are two major political parties in Congress, but in real fact, there's really one. It's called the War Party. Yes. So I don't think this would mix into it. I mean, Jerry Nadler, I mean, he's a lunatic. He might take advantage of it. Okay. What's Adam Schiff, shit for brains out there in California. He might go for it. But I wouldn't. I think there would be a lot of black plumes over the Middle East before the Democrats could actually get their act together. So I don't think that is in play right now.
I'm sure you're right.
But if things do go south and go very badly, you bet they would use this against them. You bet they would.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, White Rabbit, the U.S. has not declared war since World War II. And Paul Ledane says, enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Thanks.
And from Sparky, Super Chat Alexander, USA, UK, and Israel have many canned, complex plans for any contingency with no lead time required. One or more could be involved. They just say go.
Oh, that's absolutely right. I mean, the Pentagon has plans for practically every kind of war that you could conceivably imagine. I'm sure there's somewhere a plan in the Pentagon for an occupation of Britain, for example. I'm sure that all these plans exist. A plan is one thing, actually executing on such a plan is something completely different. I come back to what I said. No doubt the Pentagon does have plans for a war against Iran. It is a very different thing to actually go to war with Iran. I mean, would they really want to commit American lives and resources to fighting such a powerful enemy? I mean, Iran, let's be quite clear about this, would be the biggest country that the United States would find itself in conflict with since the end of the Second World War. I mean, it's much bigger country than Korea and
Iraq.
And Iraq. I mean, we're talking about a big 80 million, fairly advanced country with a very, very long history. It's a major challenge. A country that can fight back. As you know,
that's the difference.
Yes,
that's the difference.
As it may have just shown. May have just shown.
This is called the conditional podcast.
Right. Yes, Alexander.
No. I mean that's the point. I mean we have to be very careful because we must never make the mistake of saying that we know something when we are just assessing or guessing.
We just go to good sources, people we trust.
Go to good sources, and we make informed assessments based on the information that we have. But we never pretend to any kind of knowledge that we don't have, and that's not what the Duran is all about.
Okay, from Jonathan Gillespie, $5.
Okay,
Peter,
Alex, I got about 10% left on my phone. It's 2 hours.
Move through the super chats. We're towards the tail end. So, Peter, I don't see Trump responding beyond more heightened rhetoric as war with Iran kills his re-election prospects.
I think that's likely.
Yeah.
But I think he's going to want some kind of symbolism that his supporters in the media can say he's reacting in a positive way. Also, he could say he's the president of restraint, and they'll try to build up that angle of the story.
Yes.
We'll see. But
yes.
The facts that have been laid out here is that unlike previous wars, this Iran is a country that has the capability and the wherewithal to protect itself. Yes. And it can do it on so many different levels and in different theaters that it could be. It would be it would be like a swarm effect. I mean, the Pentagon would have to react to so many different things happening in so many different places simultaneously.
Yes.
Okay, and that's what asymmetrical planning on the part of Iran is all about. I mean, you'll have the Hezbollah, even Hamas possibly activated. Syria wouldn't be left untouched. Iraq is already within a good part of Iraq is already in Iran's orbit. And plus then you have all of those very beautiful modern technologies and architecture in the United Arab Emirates. Boom, it's gone in a couple of hours. Look what, according to who took responsibility, look what the Houthis did to the Saudis. And if you put an aircraft carrier anywhere close to any of that, it's gone too.
All right, super chat from Sparky, an old school case of insurance fraud gone awry. Okay, I'm
well, sure. I think again this points a little bit to this sort of suggests a false flag scenario. I think we've discussed at length why we don't think it is a false flag scenario. I mean, clearly there is more to this attack than meets the eye, but I generally don't believe it's the Saudis or the Israelis or the US. We come back to this point. The Houthis have claimed responsibility. They are not friends of Saudi Arabia, obviously, or of Israel, or of the United States. They would not have claimed responsibility for an attack like this if this attack was a false flag. It just doesn't make any kind of sense to me.
All right, from Penguins fan super chat, Peter, all Iran has to do is shut down the Strait of Hormuz, which they can. Why shoot yourself in the foot by attacking Saudi oil field and bring world condemnation?
Agreed. Agreed. Okay. I mean, again, I need to stress over and over again, Iran already feels it is at war. It is on a war footing right now. Okay. But going back to what Rouhani said, if they can't export their oil, they're going to make it, no one else will. And we're seeing this being played out, I think. All right. I mean, this is upping the ante to the point where everyone, you've seen what happened. Now let's all stare into the abyss for a short while and reconsider what's going on. Look, the Saudis have humiliated themselves in this hugely destructive war, humanitarian catastrophe in Yemen. One would think and hope that they would take this on board and end that conflict. All right. And if the Houthis were somehow involved in this, then their reason for retaliation would come to an end. I truly believe that this was carried out to make everyone stand back and look what's going on and what could happen.
Yes.
Okay, from AP Super Chat, Putin, Rouhani, and Ankara. We already answered that. Thank you for that Super Chat, AP. From Penguins fan Alexander, update on Idlib, Syria. Syrian government labeling Kurds terrorists. What do you think about that?
The Syrians have never been, the Syrian government and the Kurds have always had a tense relationship throughout the conflict. Most of the time, they've worked together. They've been allies against Al-Qaeda and ISIS and those sorts of people. At the same time, the Kurds have been maneuvering hard to try to carve out an autonomous region within Syria. And they've played this very complicated game with the United States, and that has antagonized the Syrian government, which is extremely unhappy with that because it doesn't want the United States on its territory, and it does not want a Kurdish territory becoming autonomous and slipping out of its control. So it is not surprising that there are these tense exchanges between the Syrians and the Kurds. I think, though, one must always allow for an element of Middle Eastern hyperbole when these kind of comments get thrown around. And I suspect that sooner or later, a deal between the Syrians and the Kurds will be done because the Kurds have no option and it is in the Syrians' interest. What I expect it will be a deal with the Kurds getting some kind of cultural, shall we say, decentralization rather than full autonomy, and certainly not independence. As for Idlib, as we said previously in previous programs, the Syrians have pushed up further into Idlib. They've liberated Khan Sheikhun. They've liberated large areas of northern Hama province. There is now a pause underway. That is very much the pattern of this conflict, where the Syrians and the Russians and the move one step at a time. But I have no doubt the next step will be taken. Of that, none at all.
Okay, from Sparky Super Chat. Peter, this goes to the Epstein surveillance. Was talking about the lack of surveillance footage on Saudi oil fields. Didn't mean to send you off on an Epstein tangent. Sorry.
I'm sorry. That wasn't a Freudian slip. I just misunderstood the question.
But I think you've addressed the surveillance on the Saudi oil field as well pretty thoroughly.
Well, I mean, I think it's very clear that the Saudis and the Americans and all the rest don't really want us to know how extensive the damage was.
Exactly.
I mean, one of them
is MH17, doesn't it? I mean, they know everything that's going on, but no one wants to see it.
Well, for me, the most extraordinary thing about the pictures, the photos, was that you saw this set of, domes, which I don't know what they're covered, but holes in each one hole.
Amazing.
In each one of these domes. I mean, it was incredibly precise.
From 1,000 kilometers away.
I mean, exactly. Supposedly. I mean, so this is clearly very well planned by somebody who knew exactly what they were doing.
Okay, from Rainy Step Super Chat. Are they going to roll out Clinton for president? It's both of you guys. I imagine you mean Hillary Clinton and not Bill.
Not impossible. I mean, with this lackluster crowd, it's not impossible. No. The thing is that it gets down to the DNC and did they really want to? I mean, she had her shot. Okay. I mean, I think what they would want, their dream is that Hillary would, pump her up herself with enough strength where she could go on the stump and help the nominee. But it's looking pretty grim for the Democrats right now. I mean, the more they talk, the more people are. There's not one policy the Democrats support right now that has with the exception of the gun issue. The Democrats support issues that don't even get near 50% support in the United States. So they're still. I mean, this is the caucus in the primaries, and they talk about themselves. Okay, that's traditional. Let's not overreact to it. But whoever gets what they need to do is get a nominee in real fast. Okay, because they're just digging themselves into the ground.
Yes, no expert on American politics of that, or at least Democratic Party politics. But my impression is that the sort of people who were backing Hillary Clinton in the DNC are now backing Joe Biden. And if they can't get Joe Biden, they'll go for either Kamala Harris or perhaps Elizabeth Warren. I don't see them wanting to bring Hillary back.
Elizabeth Warren seems to be. It seems to be the one. It seems to me right now. I mean, she's getting larger crowds, and the media likes her. I mean, you can tell that.
She had meetings with Hillary Clinton last week, so keep an eye on that.
Well, indeed, exactly.
Warren, Hillary Clinton. I was interested.
You know, the interesting thing is that when you look at the debates, you know what it reminds me, with the exception of Biden, because he's already done it. All of them are positioning themselves to become vice president.
Yeah.
All of them are. Yeah. Look at, that Beto or whatever his name is, okay? I mean, he's actively campaigning to become vice president.
Yeah.
Joker.
He's, oh, yeah.
From Penguins fan, I'm not sure about this story, so I'll say it to both you guys. Max Blumenthal and Rania Kalik being criticized by the Syria regime change journalist. Even Intercept wants regime change.
Oh no, that's absolutely right. I mean, we must.
What is that?
I mean, the Max Blumenthal and a colleague of his went to Syria, and they did some reporting there and said that the situation in Syria is completely different from the way it's represented in the international news media, and the result was that they were subjected to a virulent attack by a journalist who supports regime change in Syria.
Oh, okay.
So I mean, this goes on all the time.
No surprise there.
No surprise there.
Max Blumenthal, when it comes to foreign policy, keep going, bro. Keep going.
Yeah.
Okay, Alexander from Sparky Super Chat. Trump knows Saudis did it to themselves, unintentionally going too far, and Saudis know it. So Trump throws next step to them to rub their nose in it.
Well,
evidence, please.
I mean, this is all very, as Peter correctly says, this is all very speculative and not based on any actual evidence at all. What I would say is we do have one bit of evidence about Trump's thinking, which is his tweet. And what that tweet to me says is that on the one hand, he wants to appear incredibly tough, thus lock and loaded and all of that. But at the same time, when you actually unpack it and analyze it closely, the tweet itself doesn't suggest a person who's really keen to go to war. I mean, he talks about, we believe that we know, we need verification needed, kingdom must confirm. It suggests to me someone who's got many doubts in his own mind about the wisdom of this thing. Perhaps rather late in the day, but there we are.
All right.
I'm just dumbfounded. I mean, with all of the vast intelligence gathering and satellite imagery and all that, just when you need to know what happened, they don't know. Okay. MH17, the cameras weren't working that day. That computer was offline that day. I mean, again, you think we're stupid?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, I'm sure there's a whole lot more forensic evidence there, and if it's not released, it tells you one thing: it's embarrassing.
Yes, exactly.
Guys, hit that like button before I forget. I haven't said that throughout these 2 hours, and we're going to wrap it up. We still
have 17 minutes, and I'm on fumes right now.
On fumes, so let's try to get through these remaining super chats. Sparky super chats. Black Leaf 40 nicotine pesticide in Dad's Day. I'm not sure. Is that a?
Oh, I think that what the tobacco was treated with that kind of stuff. Yeah, okay. Bad stuff. Tobacco's bad, folks. Tobacco's bad. I know. I smoked for 30 years. Okay.
Okay, thank you for that super chat, Sparky. From Asavet MD, $20 super chat. No question. Thank you for that super chat. From Star Trooper, the attack was a false flag. Syria anymore. So it goes back to if the attack was a false flag.
No, well, I think we've discussed this at length. I mean, I don't think it was. I mean, I'm sure it wasn't. I mean, there have been false flags happen. I mean, as we made very clear on our many programs, we think many of the chemical attacks or the alleged chemical attacks in Syria were either false flags or fabrications. But this one doesn't have that look about it.
What we want to know is that did the Houthis do it, and how in the world did they pull it off? That's what we want to know.
Well, exactly. Yes.
Peter needs
who pulled this off?
Who pulled it off? Peter needs a backup lithium battery.
I think the Duran will invest in that.
I don't know how we're going to get
but I got to get ready for tomorrow's crosstalk. Okay, I got to get back to work.
Okay, Sparky, super chat. Duran's nuanced analysis is the best in the world.
Thank you very much. That's what we're here to do.
That's why we have Alexander Makuris here. I'm glad to be his sidekick.
Oh, no.
Mechanesia Shan, super chats. Malaysian Independence Day, 16th September. Free West Papua and Julian. West Papua and Julian.
Well, I don't know. All I would say is I've been to Malaysia. I thought it was a wonderful country, and I was really impressed by the harmony with which people seem to live there. People of different faiths and different nationalities, Chinese, Indian people, Malays. I was very, very impressed by it.
All right, thank you for that super chat. From Mike, a super chat, HK100. Will Netanyahu benefit from this attack?
Netanyahu always benefits from chaos. Yes, by definition.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They have elections going on, so keep that. And
if he doesn't win power, he's in a world of legal problems. Big time.
Yes. Absolutely. From Penguins fan, super chat. Hong Kong protesters singing "Rule Britannia" sounds like paid troublemakers. China should intervene on this.
Well, I'm going to say
intervene on this.
I think what has happened actually, if you follow the protests carefully, is that the numbers. You remember I said I think at our last live that it seemed to me that the numbers were shrinking of the protests, and I think that's now become very clear that they are now significantly shrinking, and that what's happening is that the remaining group of protesters is becoming much more violent and much more extreme. And this singing of this Rule Britannia was probably incredibly ill-judged in Hong Kong terms. So what has happened is by scrapping this extradition treaty, I think this group has become more isolated. And I think their extremism is now, because it is extremism, and to sing the song, the song like that of your former colonial master is extremism by any definition.
And Hong Kong is not. It's look at what's happened with its tourism.
Exactly.
It's a point for investment into the Eurasian land. So they've just shot themselves left and right in their foot. Okay,
exactly.
And nothing will come good of this here because they're not going to get what they want. They're baiting Beijing. Beijing isn't taking the bait.
No.
And so the people of Hong Kong are the net losers. And I don't believe it's the majority of people, but I could be wrong about that. I don't know the precise political demographics. But when you're walking around covering your head in a black mask and roughing up people, I mean, you're on the wrong side of history.
Right? Exactly.
Right. And a follow up to that super chat from Penguins fan, this Joshua Wong kid is an agent of the West. He is right there with U.S. NGOs. He should be arrested for treason.
He certainly has ties to the West. It's irrefutable. Yes.
Well, he flaunts them. I mean, there's no question about this. I mean, he is extremely pro-Western and extremely anti-Chinese. No doubt about that at all. What exactly his connections to Western intelligence services are is another matter. And as for treason, well, that's a matter for the Hong Kong authorities or the Chinese authorities to work out.
Okay, super chat from Sparky. Russia uses Sun Tzu's non-move. They sit back, perhaps even amused, while their economic enemy, the globalists, destroy themselves.
Well, I do think they do sit back, and I think they've learned an awful lot from the Chinese. But I think that they are not amused by the situation in the Gulf at all. On the contrary, as I said, the whole point about Russian foreign policy is that they always want stability and predictability, particularly in regions close to their own borders. Russia has been through too many wars and too many conflicts to want anything else.
Okay, from Sparky, a super chat. U.S. Air Force used to handle all Saudi defenses.
Well,
a lot of coordination and a lot of intelligence sharing, but I mean, from a personnel thing, I mean, obviously there are Saudis there, but it depends on what you're talking about. If it's logistics or intelligence or satellite imaging, it's always to various degrees.
Yes.
Okay, super chat from Demography Now. Can you guys comment on Israel's role in this situation and whether any evidence of Iran's involvement is being obtained by Mossad?
Well, who knows?
Mossad is always looking around.
Well, indeed, and Mossad is always there. I would add that whatever evidence comes from Mossad about what Iran is doing, I would completely discount. That's not to say it isn't correct, but I don't regard Mossad as a reliable source. I mean, they are so obviously invested in creating trouble
and disinformation.
That, I mean, I would discount it.
Let's move along and wrap up these super chats. From Star Trooper, if he attacks Iran, I will not be voting for him.
I think a lot of people will be thinking that way.
Where's Tulsi? Where's Tulsi?
Well, indeed.
Yeah, thank you for that super chat, Star Trooper. From Sparky, Iran is self-sufficient like Brazil or America.
That's what the sanctions have done. Largely, yes. But that's what the sanctions have done. Again, the law of unintended consequences. Of course, there are plenty of people in Iran that want to have access, be able to use their own financial resources to be able to involve themselves on the global stage in global financial markets. Yeah, absolutely. And there are people that do that and they feel frustrated by it. Okay, absolutely.
Okay.
All right. Really, really fast, guys, because I just got to.
We're losing Peter. Okay, let's see. Penguins fan, real quick. Who will replace John Bolton? Peter, quick.
Someone like John Bolton.
Alexander, quick.
No idea. None at all. I hope it's Douglas McGregor.
Me too. It's our choice. That's a Duran choice.
All right. From Star Trooper, if Trump signs defense treaty with Israel, I will definitely not be voting for him.
It has nothing to do with, it has no American geopolitical interest in signing that. Zero, none, negative, actually.
Absolutely. It's a terrible idea, actually.
Okay, from Sparky, Trump should call Tucker Carlson before any move. He's done it before.
Yeah, absolutely. So he should.
Or so we think.
Maybe he will.
All right. Oskan, super chat, 5 Canadian. Thank you very much for that. Super chat from American Rebel. Super chat, sweet puppy, pulling at my heartstrings.
He's sleeping. Don't bother him.
From Sparky, super chat, Alexander Mercuris, let America's evil Occupy Britain plan out of the bag. He was to be your Vichy Britain Prime Minister.
That's an interesting historical analogy. It might become true. Who knows?
Alexander, the evil Occupy Britain plan.
Well, I'm sure it exists. I've no doubt it exists. As I said, the Pentagon has plans for almost every contingency you could possibly think of. That's how it works. And I've no doubt at all they have plans like that.
Okay, from Sparky, Saudi desalination plants vulnerable to attack? ?
Well, quite possibly, yes. I mean, Saudi Arabia is a very artificial country. It's not really a country at all, as Peter correctly says. It's a large area of the Arabian Peninsula, which is controlled by a family and its tribal allies. And they have had vast wealth from oil, and they've used it to try and create desalination plants and foods and all sorts of things of this kind. But it's not really organically developed. It's something that's come down from
turnkey. Just buy it and turnkey.
Exactly. So it's very brittle and very vulnerable.
Okay, we're almost done with the super chats. Penguins fan, question for Peter. Does he follow Dinesh D'Souza's work on Democratic Party and their history?
Yes, I do. Yeah, and I like some of the things he has to say. I think he exaggerates on a number of things, but I think he's onto something. I think he's a very smart thinker. He's a bit too partisan at times, and I wish he would kind of stay away from that. But that's what he does for a living. He makes movies, partisan movies, and all that. He's a smart guy.
Yeah. All right, from Sparky, Hillary controls DNC, backs Warren as her own VP.
Possible.
Very possible.
Very possible. From Michael, super chat. Thank you very much, Michael. From Indigo Jones, how much animus has built up in the region to keep the conflict going? Is there anything Trump or others can do to calm things down?
Oh, yes, Trump can certainly calm things down. I mean, we should not underestimate the power that the US president has in this situation. But if a war begins, then, I mean, the dogs of war in the region are...
The answer to the different... If the US would just get out of the Middle East, you know what would happen? The people of the Middle East would have to deal with it themselves. Yeah. American presence in the Middle East is one big excuse not to do something. Leave and let the neighborhood figure it out itself, and it would.
All right, final super chat from Penguins fan, and it's a good one. Intercept and Democracy Now! These networks cheer jihadists in Syria.
Well, absolutely.
Now with the Intercept is a complicated place. Okay, there are some people there. I mean, to their credit, they have a lot of diversity. Okay, but Glenn Greenwald seems to be quite isolated. Democracy Now! I would really like someone to tell me what the hell is going on with Amy, because I can't understand her anymore. She's a progressive. I like listening to her and her guests because it was a good mental exercise for me. Okay, because they're not stupid people. I disagree with them. But Amy Goodman has just gone down this really weird rabbit hole, and she's really destroyed Democracy Now! As a brand, as an alternative.
Alexander, your thoughts?
Oh, it's the same. I mean, I always follow Glenn Greenwald on The Intercept because I find him an extremely interesting writer on many things, and I tend to agree with him an awful lot. But The Intercept is a strange creature altogether, and most of what I read there I don't agree with. I can't discuss Democracy Now! Because I think Peter's really said all that I can possibly say about it.
But we can't discuss the Duran. So guys, hit that like button, share the channel with everybody you know. Go to the Duran shop, PayPal, Patreon, subscribe star. The link is in the description box down below. Very, very quickly, Peter, what are you checking out this week?
What we're talking about now, I'm doing tomorrow on Crosstalk. Just this topic about the attack.
That will air on Wednesday, correct?
Wednesday, all day, and it'll be on YouTube Wednesday.
Okay, Alexander, what are you checking out
this is the overwhelmingly big news. I mean, it is whether we have a conflict in the Gulf now between the United States.
There's something in Brexit.
And tomorrow Brexit, we have the Supreme Court. I don't know whether we'll get the decision. There'll be the Supreme Court case which will consider all these appeals, and that will give us further ideas of where Brexit is going. For what it's worth, by the way, and no doubt we will be coming to this soon, Boris Johnson is now giving more hints that he's intending to defy the law, the Ben Letwin.
Well, I look forward to you and Christopher discussing it, because I will learn, okay, because this has gotten way too complex for my distant perch in Moscow.
Well, believe me, Peter, most people in Britain find it too complicated also. I mean, very sad about it.
I agree with Peter on Amy Goodman. She's sold out. Yeah. All right, guys, that's it. 2.5 hours. Peter, your battery made it. Alexander, how you holding up?
Oh, I'm very well. I've been.
And a final super chat from Orlando Acevedo. Thank you, Orlando. 25. It just says that's a super chat. It says 25. All right, guys, thank you very much for tuning in. We hope you have a really, really good week wherever you are in the world. Peter Lavelle, host of RT's Crosstalk in Moscow. Thank you, Peter. And of course, the Oracle of London in London, Alexander Merkurs. Thank you, Alexander. Take care, everybody. Have a good morning, afternoon, or evening.